Well, Immanuel Brockhaus has brought up a very interesting idea to me. He, like me, must have a sense that virtual instruments are identical. I mean, even different mini modes don't sound exactly like each other. When you made a sound chart and you told it, I want this pot to be at 200, that's going to be slightly different attack time than some other instrument. So the value that physical instruments have is a certain sense of uniqueness. And you've brought up this idea that instruments might age that are virtual. Actually, I like this idea very much. And it's not without precedent, I might say. I'm always the historian. When Louis and Bebe Barron built their own electronic devices to do Forbidden Planet, 1956, to do Forbidden Planet, Dory Sherry had hired them. They'd heard them over at R.H. Ranger's studio, where they'd been helping John Cage put together some of his tape pieces, Williams mix perhaps, and things like that. The idea that the circuitry would have a life, the Barrons believed in this. They built these kind of one-of-a-kind things, not really a synthesizer, not integrated with keyboards and stuff, but circuits, and they were very much modeled after what they thought Wiener had done with cybernetics. He had published papers about cybernetics. And so they built these things, and the components would age. They had tubes, and they had things that heated up like human beings. There's entropy with human beings. There's entropy with age. There's environmental situations, as you're pointing out, humidity and temperature. We know that the old Moogs, very temperature sensitive. You could almost use them as thermometers. The oscillators were so unstable. So, yes, anything to me that would bring not random, but conditions into the environment of making music that are not identical, I think would be very valuable. And I think you might do that in software. Now, what they did is the Barrons, they would build these circuits and everything, and they would use them for a while, and literally they would die. And they would make funny sounds as they died, and they sort of made a catalog of these, and then they wouldn't try to revive it. It was a dead circuit. There it is. Very anthropomorphic idea about machines, which maybe that will keep us from being machines. If we think about machines in a more anthropomorphic way, that might be very valuable. Now, one of the things that you can always do, though, is with virtual instruments, and I'll tell a little anecdote because I worked with Bob Moog, and things are on my mind. Bob Moog was his career with the Moog Company was almost as checkered as mine. He was in and out and in and out, and in North Carolina, and resigned, and so forth and so on. In favor, fallen out of favor, and I understand that. Trust me. But at any rate, when Arturia Moog V came out, I looked at it. I was very disappointed. I liked the sound. I thought the sound was pretty darn good, for a virtual instrument. By that we mean wholly digital. I thought, that's pretty good sound, it's pretty good. And it had, 24 voltage-controlled amplifiers, multipliers. Except the weird part was they had decided that the VCAs would only work if you pressed the note on keyboard. This is crazy. They shouldn't have been able to work independently. Then there were some other things about what's known as ergonomics, human engineering, and I'm somewhat steeped in that. Not being an engineer, I'm sort of on the outside looking in, and I think about, well, what is it that the user sees and touches that's really very important? In so many designs, it's left, we'll have a front panel, and so, assistant engineer will do that, and that's a mistake. Jim Scott and I, anytime we thought about instruments, he said, and I said independently, from the outside in. What does the user touch and what's the nomenclature and so forth. But this idea about individualism, one thing that came jumping to the rescue was physical modeling. And that's going to have to be pretty close to what you're talking about, the concept of the reality that physical parts age. You know, anybody knows when you get an old synth, the first thing you want to do is probably go replace the capacitors, depending on what kind they are. But that's what my tech usually does. You know, fortunately on the Moog modules, no. I mean, they have survived for all the way from 1970, pretty much intact. That Mini Moog, it actually has a metal front panel with anodized nomenclature. That means etched into the metal. It's not plastic. It's a very, very special Mini Moog, and you'd have to see it before Steve Masucci got a hold of it. I thought, I can never bring that back. Oh, no, it'll clean up. Yeah, there it is. It looks beautiful. But I love this idea that we have to counter some way the identity crisis, shall we call it. And not only will each one of those virtual instruments be the same software, and you could argue, well, you can tweak it and do it differently. Yeah, but as soon as everybody understands how amplitude modulation works, that it's a multiplicative process and so forth and so on, and they have the same D to A converter, if you do the same math, you're going to get the same sounds. You know, and the only thing that can come to the rescue, whether it's a concept as you've articulated, this kind of human concept, which I very much like, of the software can age, it can change. Or you're going to have to build in physically modeling things that could age and change. And that's in some ways what people have done. Now, speaking of sampling in its latter days now, in 2016, I've got this wonderful system from Ingo. Forgot his last name. He's German. Dyna Sample. He has learned how to butt and put samples end to end such that when you blow a wind instrument, like an EVI or any of these things, it does a marvelous job of interpolating between this whole group of samples. You could think of instrumental performance as a huge bank of samples, and you bring in the one that you need at the appropriate time. On a violin, you've got many degrees of freedom on the bow arm alone, maybe 9 or 10. And then you can do things with your left hand, and you can go where on the bridge you are. The angle, there's like a airplane. You got roll, pitch, and yaw. You know, you got the same thing on a violin bow. There are degrees of freedom. I was taught this by Dr. David A. Luce, who worked at Moog, this concept of degrees of freedom. Sampling has become wonderful in so many ways. It was really very, I refer to it as freeze-dried sounds, you know. And my colleagues, you know, it's like, oh, well, he's stuck in the mud. No, I just have a different conception. I have a different conception of what I hear and what I know could be done, both about history and about the development of instruments, maybe, than they do. You know, when I see something, I don't judge it just by what I see. I judge it by what it could have been. And that's just an old habit from being a consultant. It's like, well, if you'd done this, this would have worked better. First time I ever picked up the Moog, what the heck was its name? It was never a big seller. Oh, portable. Liberation. The Liberation. First time I ever picked up a Moog Liberation. I said, what? Oh, what's wrong now, Tom? I said, are you kidding me? The guy's supposed to hang this on his neck? I said, do you know how much the average guitar weighs? This thing's got to weigh 2.5 times what a guitar weighs. This is not going to work. And here's what I got. Well, what happens when the player drops it? I said, what happens when he drops his no-blade saxophone? You don't do that. You don't drop it. If you drop it, you take it to the woodwind expert and have it reconstructed. And you do the same thing with your liberation. You don't make it weigh a ton, you know. It's not like a studio. And again, this gets back to demographics, psychographics, understanding what the musician really wants and feels and thinks, and how do you get inside of their head, this kind of thing. It takes a lifetime, I think, to do this. A lot of these young hotshot software designers, they can do wonders with software, and you wonder, well, why did you just reprise the past slavishly? Why didn't you come and ask me what frustrated you about that equipment that you would have liked to have broken out of and had something better? No. So we wind up getting Mini Moogs that look like Mini Moogs and ARP 2600s and Moog Arturia Vs and stuff like that. Very little imagination. On the other hand, when you get somebody like Lippold Haken, who worked unilaterally, basically, you know, for the last 20 years or so, you get a musical instrument. I mean, this thing, you know, and I'm not saying it's gonna be a big seller, because I'm galvanized to the idea that in a marketplace, the base is very broad and very dumbed down. Only at the apex of the pyramid are you going to find these incredible things that we can do with electronics now. But I'm hopeful. I think we're in a period of controllerism now that Bob Moog would have been happy about. I think that the Haken Continuum is Bob Moog's dream when he did the multiply touch sensitive keyboard. He had X, Y, and Z control, but it was in the wrong idea. It was movable keys. This works, you know. So we'll see.